They were taught that capture was a living death, that the enemy would strip them, starve them, crush them until nothing remained but shame. And then, bitter air, snow underfoot, the doors of a U.S. Army train clattering open in Wisconsin in 1944, and a smell they hadn't known in months. Hot meat on a griddle, bread warming, something sweet and fizzy hissing in glass. Not a beating, not a bayonet, a lunch line. What they thought they knew about the enemy's cruelty collided hard with an unexpected force, order, rules, and a meal that tasted like peacetime. This is the true story of Camp McCoy, a World War II prisoner of war camp in the American Midwest, and the way ordinary, routine decency could feel as destabilizing as any weapon. All people hold equal dignity. Remember that as we step inside the wire.
The place had a plain American name, Camp McCoy, later Fort McCoy, 90 miles northwest of Madison, Wisconsin. Rows of tar-papered barracks, guard towers shouldering into a winter sky, barbed wire clamped taut like a zipper across the landscape. Trucks rumbled along crisp, plowed roads lined with snow. And in January 1944, inspection teams and camp officers knew they were running something unusual. The largest permanent Japanese POW camp in the continental United States, with thousands of men behind its wire by war's end. Even before most Japanese soldiers set foot in Wisconsin, Camp McCoy was on the inspection map. The Protecting Powers diplomats and International Committee of the Red Cross representatives were being let inside U.S. camps, walking the barracks, tasting the food, conferring privately with prisoners. In early January 1944, an inspection report specifically noted a visit to Camp McCoy, part of a routine that, at its best, tried to make the Geneva Convention more than a slogan. Not perfect, not propaganda. An earnest, bureaucratic habit of checking and rechecking. For the men arriving that winter, capture still felt like annihilation. Many had been told since basic training that surrender was worse than death. They braced to be struck. Instead, the intake was antiseptic and strangely respectful. Delousing, a medical exam, name and number recorded, and interpreters repeating, slowly, again and again, the rules they could expect under the 1929 Geneva Convention. They would be housed, clothed, fed. They could receive and send mail, and soon after arrival they'd be allowed to write a capture card home so their families would know they were alive. It was not mercy. It was policy. And policy, especially when you've prepared yourself for a club to the skull, can feel like a miracle. There were letters, yes, thin envelopes that could travel the world and back. The convention the U.S. followed in World War II let detaining powers limit the volume, but it required a capture postcard within about a week and insisted mail move by the shortest route. Different camp systems set different monthly quotas, and practice varied by time and place. But the point stands. Correspondence wasn't a privilege to be dangled. It was part of the rules. And across U.S. camps, the Protecting Powers and Red Cross pushed those rules to be honored. Then came food. The mess hall at McCoy looked like a stateside Army cafeteria for depot troops, and a 1943 photo from the fort's archive shows long tables, steam tables, and a room designed to feed efficiently and fast. The menu followed U.S. Army practice, hot, hearty, predictable. For men pulled off starving fronts, that predictability hit like a tidal wave. What staggered them wasn't just volume, it was the routine. The idea that lunch could be just lunch. Outside the mess, there was another shock, the camp canteen. Work details earned scrip, and with it prisoners could buy toiletries, tobacco, candy, and, often enough in U.S. camps, ice cream and soft drinks.
In at least one Midwestern branch camp, an official report noted Coca Cola on sale until May 1st, 1945, when new restrictions kicked in. That tells you something about the baseline. In a global war of shortages, the American rear could still keep soda cold for men in enemy uniforms. McCoy's mission evolved quickly. In spring 1943, it shifted from housing enemy aliens to full POW operations. By late 1943, the compounds held Japanese and German prisoners. And in 1944 to 45, new groups arrived by the trainload. The numbers would crest around roughly 2,700 Japanese, nearly 3,000 Germans, and several hundred Koreans by the end of the war, making McCoy a hub within a statewide network of more than 36 branch camps. Wisconsin's farms and factories needed hands. The Army had men to loan if the work met the rules. Roll call, work detail, classes, mail call, bed check, repeat. That was the arc of a McCoy day. Not every prisoner left the wire. Many labored inside the camp, shoveling snow, cutting wood, maintaining roads, while selected work crews went out to supervised jobs. In October 1944, California's governor asked for Japanese POW labor in the San Joaquin Valley. McCoy sent trainloads west for the harvest. In the labor-starved Midwest and West, POW work fit squarely inside Geneva's allowances, non-military tasks under guard with pay credited and canteen rights attached. The rules turned out to be surprisingly elastic in humane ways. Inspectors and chaplains pushed for religious accommodations. At McCoy, the Japanese carved out space for Buddhist practice, and sources describe shrines and incense arranged within the camp routine. Diet adjustments, rice, soy sauce, pickles, appeared alongside the standard American fare, not as favors, but as a way to keep order and health. It was pragmatic, and it looked like respect. None of that dimmed the wire. Look at the place from a frozen January morning. Double fence perimeter, tower silhouettes, rifles trained down into snow-tracked yards. Guards were brisk, sometimes cold. Orders were orders. But in the little spaces between orders, new things crept in. A private from Illinois, 20 and homesick, showing a photo of his kid sisters through a fence. A POW, trying English words under his breath. Bread, window, family. And smiling when he gets close enough to be understood. Canteen gum passed across a worksite with a silent nod. That was the uneasy novelty. The enemy had a face, and it wasn't the one anyone had been promised. One truth that keeps turning up in POW histories of the United States is the workmanlike normalcy of it all. Historians have argued for years, sometimes with a little wryness, that POWs in the U.S. often lived better than many civilians in wartime Europe or Asia. That doesn't mean every camp was kind or every day easy. It means that in the American rear, standards tended to be rules-driven and decently resourced. A study of U.S. POW policy even quotes German prisoners joking that the PW stenciled on their backs stood for pensioned Wehrmacht. Hyperbole, sure, but it catches the tone. At McCoy, the Japanese prisoners were a minority in the state network, but a majority inside those particular compounds, and their presence made the camp famous. The New Yorker, in a 1944 squib, told readers that Japanese POWs were kept at Camp McCoy, while Germans and Italians were scattered through dozens of other sites. It was shorthand, but it captured a wartime perception that McCoy was the place where America held its Japanese enemy soldiers in the Midwest. Who were these men?
Some had been captured in the Central Pacific, pushing against the American island-hopping drive. Some were sailors pulled from the sea. And one, famously, was the first Japanese POW of the Pacific War, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, whose midget submarine ran aground off Oahu during the Pearl Harbor attack. After interrogation in Hawaii and the mainland, Sakamaki spent most of the war in U.S. camps, including long stints in Wisconsin, learning English, and surviving the shame that his own government insisted should have killed him. His story would become an emblem of what captivity in the U.S. looked like when the war finally ended. But let's go back to a first day, because first days crystallize myths. Imagine stepping into the McCoy mess hall after weeks of watery rice and barley. The room is loud with trays and boots. Steam hangs in the air above the serving line. A cook, in rolled sleeves, slides something onto your plate that's not a fish head or a thimble of salted pickles. It's heavy, hot, fat-scented. A bottle with a red script label goes clink on the tray. You don't know the word for it yet. You bring the glass to your lips, and the first carbonation burn makes you cough. It's just a soda, and it feels like treason to enjoy it. That scene, captors feeding you as if you were a recruit, could scramble a life's worth of training faster than any beating would. And in U.S. camps, the combination of hearty mess hall fare and canteen stock that included soft drinks wasn't unusual. That was the disorientation. The enemy's abundance felt indecently casual. Routine set in. Work details pulled men outside the wire to shovel roads, harvest timber, clear snowdrifts. Inside the compounds, men repaired clothing, tended stoves, cleaned barracks. Wages were credited, then spent. Razor blades, writing paper, chocolate. The coupons burned holes in pockets. Meanwhile, the Red Cross kept visiting. Spanish and Swedish representatives, protecting powers for Japan in this war, asked questions, took notes, met with prisoner spokesmen in private. Whatever else the global war was, it was also a paperwork engine. And for the Japanese at McCoy, that bureaucracy meant someone kept showing up to check the temperature of the soup and the fit of the blankets. And there were classes. Some nights an American handed chalk to a POW and the barracks turned into a tiny school. Bread, table, window, snow. The notebooks filled with block capitals. The laughter at mispronunciations was real, but not cruel. Across the aisle, another group sat in meditation in front of a makeshift Buddhist altar. A chaplain walked the aisle without intruding. The camp's own historical notes, filtered through decades of local and Army research, point to these small accommodations, Buddhist services, modest dietary shifts, tucked into the routine of a Midwestern garrison town. Letters were lifelines. 24 sentences to carry home a world. I am alive. I am warm. I am eating. The convention's machinery insisted those words get through, if at all possible, and it required capture cards to go quickly. On paper, at least, international law had carved out a protected channel for this thin traffic of hope. For many, the letters that trickled back carried a different smell. Smoke. Cities burning. Families dwindling. That's when the contradictions landed with full weight. How do you eat your lunch when you know your children ration weeds? How do you bow to the emperor in your heart when your captors bring rice to your plate without hate in their eyes? Look closely, and you can catch the tension inside a barracks at lights out. On one bunk, a man whispers that the camp's lessons are a trick, that kindness is bait, that cigarettes and soda and the chance to earn pennies are snares meant to turn him soft. On the next bunk,
Someone quietly answers that survival is not betrayal. Neither is right. Both are human. The argument never really ends. It just quiets when fatigue finally shuts their eyes. Not every day inside the wire was calm. A few Japanese prisoners tried to slip the fence. 3 got all the way to Winona by stealing along the Mississippi corridor before being caught. Another took a rowboat and made it as far as Prairie du Chien before recapture. Escape was the old language of war, proof that the wire still held. The fact that most stayed put wasn't love of captivity. It was calculation, and the growing realization that the enemy ran this place by rule rather than rage. While McCoy settled into its routines, the wider Wisconsin system expanded. Stalag Wisconsin, a later historian dubbed it, dozens of branch camps feeding local labor shortages with guarded work crews. POWs in the United States did agricultural work, timber cutting, canning factory shifts, and they drew pay they could spend at the canteen. The sheer scale surprises people. Roughly 3 dozen branch camps across Wisconsin alone, and upward of 20,000 Axis prisoners cycled through the state during the war. McCoy sat at the center. Its compounds, the central switching yard. There's a head-spinning snapshot from October 1944. California, short of farm labor, asking for Japanese POWs to help bring in a valley's worth of crops. McCoy puts men onto trains, sends them west under guard, and brings them back after the harvest. Imagine the cognitive whiplash for a soldier who had fought under banners that called Americans decadent and collapsing, and now sees the enemy's food system calling him a captive to pick its fruit so the market bins stay full. And yet, even the best-run camps had hard edges. Not every guard was friendly. Not every encounter at a farm fence was gentle. A father who had a son killed in the Pacific could spit near a POW's boots and walk away shaking. The rule book didn't erase grief, it only contained it. Inside the wire, a 19-year-old American private could show a photo through the fence to a 22-year-old Japanese sailor, and the two could nod. Outside the wire, a mother with a Blue Star flag in her window could see an enemy in a truck and look away. All of those reactions fit inside this story. All deserve respect. The war moved fast. Through 1944, the Central Pacific fell island by island. Europe lurched from the Norman hedgerows to the Ardennes and the Rhine. News arrived in the camp as rumor, then headline, then official statement. Men who had been promised invincibility learned to parse the smoke of defeat. In August 1945, the front page of McCoy's Post newspaper thundered, "Extra, war's over." And on September 2nd, the signatures on the Missouri made it official. What does defeat feel like to a man lying on a McCoy bunk? Heavy, like a wool blanket that doesn't warm. Some wept under the blankets. Some stared at the wall. Some folded their capture cards and read them back as if they could reverse time. The guards kept routines steady. No gloating, no triumphant parades through the compounds. The inspections continued. The canteens stayed open as stocks allowed. The mess lines moved. In bureaucratic terms, repatriation wheels spun up. Names on lists, medical checks, clean uniforms, train timetables, and ship manifests. In human terms, men felt a homeland burning and wondered if they still had a place in it. Ship holds filled with the rustle of paper, letters folded and refolded, small carvings made in quiet hours, notebooks with shaky English nouns.
And with the lull of an engine at sea, some POWs thought about this odd American place where rules held. For a few, the memory that surfaced wasn't a beating or a tower light. It was lunch on a first day, the weight of a meat sandwich, the shock of sweetness from a glass bottle, the unspectacular abundance of Tuesday. U.S. camp canteens and mess halls had served many such meals during the war. At McCoy, photos of the dining facility and the paper trail of inspections point to a daily grind that prioritized calories and predictability. In wartime, that could feel like grace.
When the ships nosed into Japanese harbors in late 1945 and 1946, the returning men stepped into cities that had been torn open by fire. Families had survived by ingenuity and luck. Some wives had remarried. Some children had been evacuated to the countryside and come back changed. The men carried a complicated cargo of stories: shame, survival, and the memory that an enemy had fed them within the rules. Many stayed quiet. A few, like Kazuo Sakamaki, eventually spoke, wrote, worked, and lived long lives, their private journeys bending toward pacifism and daily work rather than slogans. So what exactly made McCoy different? First, scale and focus. Contemporary accounts and later Army histories agree that McCoy became the primary site for Japanese POWs in the continental U.S., especially early on, while other nationalities were dispersed more widely. Second, the transparent, even fussy, insistence on inspections, protecting POWs and the ICRC walking the gravel, asking to see kitchens and infirmaries, interviewing prisoners out of earshot of guards. Third, the practical accommodations, religious observances, modest tweaks to diet, a classroom's worth of English chalked in a barracks aisle. Hard-edged war met Midwestern routine, and the routine held. We should be clear about something. The Geneva regime that structured these men's days in Wisconsin was the 1929 Convention, not the post-war 1949 text many people know from later conflicts. Under 1929, mail had to be allowed, but the exact monthly limits were set by each belligerent. Capture cards were to go out swiftly, and relief shipments and inspections were built into the bones of the system. The United States, with its industrial depth and insulated rear area, could make those provisions real most of the time. That context matters for understanding why the routines at McCoy so often look organized, well-supplied, and to a starving enemy, almost unbelievable. There is a famous observation in the social history of POW camps that routine can be as transformative as rhetoric. The lunch line teaches as effectively as a lecture. In the McCoy story, the lesson wasn't triumphalist. It wasn't about one nation's virtue over another's. It was smaller and therefore, in a way, bigger. In a century that mechanized killing, the system here mechanized decency, measured, inspected, and sometimes, yes, clumsy. People argue about whether that changed minds. It certainly complicated them. A small scene, near the end of the war, captures the contradiction. A work crew clears a road in snow. A cluster of local kids, cheeks pinked by cold, stands at the fence. One girl, 8, 9, pushes a candy bar through the wire to a prisoner. He freezes, takes it, bows. He eats slowly. He will remember that taste for 60 years. He will never agree about the war with a man whose son died in the Pacific. But he will remember the kid with the candy.
That memory sits beside the memory of a first soda. The two do not cancel each other. They simply coexist.
And yes, not every day at McCoy was calm. There were discipline problems, arguments that curdled into threats, and those few escapes. There were rules broken and punishments given. The record even shows that in different camps across the country, canteen stock tightened toward the end of the war. One inspection in the Midwest noted that Coca Cola and beer became unavailable after May 1, 1945, when new restrictions came down. But the larger pattern in U.S. camps, including McCoy, remained. A steady adherence to a rules-first system that fed, housed, inspected, and repatriated a captive enemy.
Through it all, an axiom worth repeating: all people hold equal dignity. The men in those barracks did, the guards did, the farmers they worked for did, and the families waiting on both sides of the Pacific did. The war made that hard to see. The wire distorted it. The routines, oddly, sometimes brought the idea back into focus. When you strip this story to its frame, what remains is simple. In a Wisconsin winter, a group of men trained to die rather than surrender stepped off a train expecting pain. What they got, first, was a first aid kit and a clipboard, then a bunk and a blanket, and then a meal, served not as a gift, but as a requirement. It felt like betrayal to enjoy it. It felt like humiliation to need it. It also felt like life. And that's the razor's edge Camp McCoy sat on from 1942 to 1946. A garrison town that became, for a brief, intense period, a factory for making the laws of war tangible. The fort's own archival program has recovered images of those mess halls and barracks. Army researchers and local historians have pieced together logs and photographs. Journalists in 1944 and scholars since have tried to make sense of a place where the United States concentrated its Japanese prisoners and made routines out of obligations. It won't fit onto a poster, but it does fit into 45 minutes of careful attention. As ships carried men home, some POWs tried to translate the experience for families who had suffered under firebombing and privation. Many could not. Some put it in a sentence for their children decades later. The enemy fed me. The enemy kept the rules. I survived. One man, Sakamaki, prisoner number 1, would spend a lifetime working quietly, returning to the United States only rarely, his wartime submarine displayed in a Texas museum. He had wanted to die on a Hawaiian beach. He ended up living long enough to stand at a podium and talk about survival. The wire at McCoy was a chapter in that long arc. The last image is not a tower. It's a tray sliding across a counter, steam rising, a glass bottle whispering when it opens. The surprise on a face as sweetness hits a tongue burned thin by salt and hunger. In another war, in another place, this meal could be a propaganda tableau. At Camp McCoy, it was a Tuesday. If this story resonated, subscribe to keep more true World War II accounts in your feed. These voices, long buried, still speak about choices in the darkest hours and who we become when it counts. Choose your next chapter on screen.